Hello, everyone. Today on the Doctor Who Guide, I am super excited. I am joined by another contributor to the annual, writer Paul Mount, who wrote in the a short story in the 1997 unofficial Doctor Who annual by Trackless Distributors, The Sands of Horag. Thank you so much for joining me today, Paul.
My pleasure, Alex. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very honored.
This is so exciting to be talking with you. I know that anybody who wants to get this annual can now order it. It is out. It came out May 30th. Can you believe it? Seems just
Yes.
yesterday, but
Yeah, it
it's
seems
been a
like a
couple
few
months
weeks.
now.
Yeah.
And so links to order this annual are in the description down below and in the card up above. Today we're going to talk about your involvement in the annual, your short story that you wrote, The Sands of Horag, beautifully illustrated, and it's been really quite fun to see these three characters celebrated and to get to talk to all of the different artists and writers that I have been able to. How were you first contacted to do this story? How do you get involved with Tarakwis Distributors?
Well, I'd written stories for Terraquis' previous two books, or two of their previous books, the 1972 and the 88 editions, and they just came back to me and asked me to do a third one. So presumably they must have quite liked the first one. I think they went down fairly well. As you know, with these sorts of things, you don't get massive feedback, but certainly the editors seem to be quite happy with them, and they asked me to do the third one. I was a little bit sort of apprehensive about doing one for this particular era with these characters because I wasn't that familiar with the Doctor Sard Stacy combination. I'd read the comic strips in the Radio Times back in the day, but I hadn't seen them since then, and I'd forgotten about them. But Mark was very kind enough to send me PDFs of the story, so I was able to sort of bone up on them and remind myself. And I thought, well, yeah, hopefully I can do something because it's an interesting selection of characters to put together, the Doctor and a human female and an ice warrior. And although I'm not necessarily a huge fan of stuff that's very heavily continuity based, I prefer to try and do something new. I thought it was an interesting idea, and I thought, yeah, let's see what I can go with this.
You're right that the three characters, this is the most artwork, the most stories
Mm.
that's ever since the comics been
Yeah,
created around these.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
it is kind of, I think, a universal experience for the contributors that you may have known of the comics, or even I know some people collected them or read them right when they came out. I had seen uploads of them on the internet, which were few and far between before. So you may have known of the comics, but I think all of us kind of turned back to that source material to get more familiar with these characters. Obviously, with the Eighth Doctor, only one TV movie, so none of us got to like grow up with him as a Doctor on screen. But I think that you did a really wonderful job of getting a handle on the Eighth Doctor, his energetic mannerisms, his almost as I think of the beginning of your story, the Sands of Horag, it harkens in my mind back to the let's see, either the Keys of Marinus when they're on the beach of
Yeah.
glass, or the Web Planet where the
Mm.
doctors, it's important to test the waters before you get in them, and that sort of idea of you know the very landscape not being what it seems. And I suppose that also reminds me of the plants growing
Yeah.
in the jungle, the
Yeah.
screams of the jungle. And so
Mm.
talk to me about your inspiration when writing this. Was it wanting a nice vacation on the beach yourself, or was there an impetus?
I think it's hard to remember exactly now because I think I probably wrote it about 2.5 years ago. So I don't know exactly
Yeah.
where it all came from, but I know the idea. I knew with these characters, I wanted to spend time with these characters because I didn't know them very well and I wanted to see what I could do with them. And I think one of the problems that often occurs to me writing a short story, when you've got about 8,000 words, it's hard to sort of bring other characters into the story. Sometimes you have to keep it very focused and very much about the TARDIS crew. And in my previous two stories, I made a special effort to bring in just a couple of other characters just to widen it up a little bit. But with this one, I thought, well, no, I won't. I've done that. I'll just stick with these three, particularly because they're not characters that people are familiar with. We haven't seen them on TV and in books and things over the years. So I thought it'd be nice just to focus on them. And yeah, I think I did consciously think I will try to evoke that adventure in space and time spirit of the very beginning of the Doctor Who series, where they land somewhere, the Doctor's very wary, and the companions are sort of enthusiastic and sort of jump in without thinking. And I wanted to bring back that sense of the unknown. And in doing that, I didn't want to do a traditional sort of rubber suit monster type thing. I wanted some different sort of alien intelligence that wasn't necessarily hostile, but was just so alien that it was hard for even the Doctor to quite understand what it was. And I think it just developed organically as I'd written it. I know I had the idea, and as you say, it was quite a sort of a Keys of Maris chase type thing of the landing on this sandy planet very hot, where there appears to be nothing, but there is something there. And that was, I think, an image that was in my head. And I thought, well, where will this go? And when the idea of sort of sentient sand came along, it sort of fell into place after that, really.
Yeah, I think of whether it's Death to the Daleks, where Sarah
Mm.
Jane wanted just a vacation and didn't get
Yeah.
it.
But
Uh,
that's often a thing with stories. What's the starting point? And I wanted to avoid the sort of distress signal type story, which you tend to have quite a lot. We pick up a distress signal and go somewhere. And I did consciously go for the companion wants a holiday because that is quite an amusing sort of thing that, the companions want to have a rest from running around and being chased. And I thought that was a nice little cliche to lob in there and try and put a spin on it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because what we see of the adventures of most companions is quite harrowing, and
Oh yeah,
I
yeah,
can imagine just we don't see a lot of it, but just sort of the times in between stories where
mm,
they're just sort of panting and
yeah,
decompressing and
yeah,
catching their
yeah.
breath from running
That's right.
around. But
Yeah,
and it's funny that you mentioned how having that restriction of a shorter story can result in it being harder to bring in a whole sort of cast of characters. You're not going to
yeah,
necessarily introduce eight other side characters for them
yeah.
to
That's right.
meet and discuss with.
Yeah,
It, but I do think that a lot of I'm just blown away by the creativity that has come out of this annual and
oh
sort
yeah,
of that restriction, just like how in the original comic strips you had a limited number of panels
mm,
to catch people up
yeah,
on and then have some
absolutely. Yeah,
plot and pitch the cliffhanger.
yeah,
In my story, I was specifically told to keep it all within the TARDIS, so I kind of had almost no other characters other than the TARDIS crew to look at, and so it's interesting to hear you talk about that because we both ended up having to focus on who these characters are and how they would interact
mm,
with each other,
yeah,
and so I do think that the limitations can breed a lot of creativity. I did also find ways to bring in other characters as well in ways in which they both were and weren't there. And so,
mm,
talking about these stories is always striking a balance of, not giving away so much that it's still, it doesn't spoil anything for the reader. But
yeah.
if you kind of, had to, we still want to address these and talk about them to pitch them, as it were. And so, how would you pitch your story to a potential reader?
Um, I would probably pitch it as um, an untypical yet typical Doctor Who story in that it takes the Doctor and his companions to a strange new planet where they meet um, a form of life that none of them have ever met before. And it takes all the Doctor's ingenuity to work out what it is. Even though it's not necessarily a hostile intelligence, it still poses a risk to them.
That's an excellent pitch, and what I love about the short stories and what you're talking about is, nowadays we that episode could be made on TV.
Yeah,
It would have a lot of CGI to
yeah,
represent that stuff, but it could absolutely be made. But what I love about these short stories both of the time and retrospectively, like we're writing now, is that they really couldn't have done that story. I don't think back in the day, certainly for most
No,
of classic Doctor Who,
no,
or even in the '90s. You know, maybe if they had a movie level budget.
yeah,
I suppose they something like that. I'm getting Dune vibes, I suppose, but
yeah. But I think, yeah, certainly there's this the sequence at the end when the sand becomes sentient and, without spoiling it, adopts a humanoid form. You'd have to do that with CGI or some form of motion capture or something. So you couldn't have done that back in the 70s or 80s, or at least you couldn't have done it convincingly. But then that's the thing about Doctor Who, they would have tried. They would have tried to
yeah,
do it, because that was one of the attractions of Doctor Who, is that even back in the 60s, they had the ideas and then worried about how they were going to do them. But it was the ideas
right,
that were the most important thing. And very often, visually, they didn't work. But it didn't. And again, it's that cliche that Doctor Who is about the stories, not the effects, not the visuals. And they would try to do all sorts of things. You look back at things like the Web Planet in 1965. They tried to create this entire planet with no other humanoid characters. And yes, it looks shonky and it looks wonky by today's standards, but to think that they did this on a budget of about £2,000 per episode, and they didn't care about the fact that it was a massive challenge. They just rose to it and did it. And that's
right.
one of the great things about Doctor Who.
Absolutely. And they had limited time as well as
Yeah,
budget, and
yeah.
to take on
Tiny,
what they did.
tiny studios.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
I mean, we think it was done in a lot of it was done in Lime Grove Studios, which were prehistoric studios when they were doing it in the 60s. And they tried to do
Yeah,
these massive planets and aliens and things. You have to admire the fact that they wanted to give it a go. But it would have been much easier to have a story with two people in a room chatting. But they went for it. And I think that's the thing that I like to try and do in stories, is just push, even though it's not a visual thing as such, you're doing it with words, still to try and push a little bit and see where you can go, because there's any way you can go. And when you do write you'll know yourself, unless you've got an idea in your head already. Sometimes you're sitting there thinking, right, I've got all of space and all of time. You know, it's almost like a line for the program. Where do you want to start? Because you
yeah.
literally can tell any story.
Right. And you can go anywhere, do anything.
Yeah,
And, we weren't held back by, well, we were held back by a length
yeah,
only, but the rest was all up to our imaginations.
yeah.
Your your story was illustrated by Veronica Kunkova. I
Oh,
hope I'm
yeah.
pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah.
Beautiful
Oh,
illustrations, and
they're fantastic. I mean, they really lift it, I think, and they really help because they are not caricatures exactly, but they're sort of broad images of those characters, and that helps to create that sense of the alien, I think. So when I saw them before it was published, I was like, well, these are almost the perfect illustrations for it, because they have a sort of cartoon, otherworldly quality to them, which I think really suits it.
right, right. And, we're able to have these beautiful full color
Yeah,
illustrations. Back in the day, some of the annuals, I had to have either black and white illustrations, or
yeah,
there was only one or two colors used. And
yeah.
so I'm
That's
just
right.
so grateful just to, be at a time where we can make something
Yeah.
that is so,
Well,
varied. And so you say you got to see the
yeah.
finished illustrations. Were you
Yes.
involved in any dialogue with the artist, or did
No,
you
not
just
at
get to
all.
see the
No.
end result?
They were just sent to me as, these are the illustrations. What do you think of them? And I was like, yeah, fantastic. I mean, the perfect. If you could have asked me what sort of illustrations, I really wanted the couple of the illustrations that you get of the TARDIS and the sand, because I like that image of the TARDIS at an angle, at an awkward angle, and I thought that was a perfect. That just summed up the story, because I thought, well, that shows you the world that I've created in a
Absolutely.
picture, and it's just perfect, perfect.
It is so, there's something so fun about seeing your, illustrations of your story, and
Yeah.
how somebody has brought them to life.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um,
But I think it's
and
just it's I think it's the fact that somebody else has read the story and it's inspired them to create illustrations based on it. It's fired their imagination enough for them to come up with stuff like that. And I think, well, I'm just amazed by that. You can get that sort of reaction from people.
Absolutely. I just have to ask, it's not a Doctor Who related question, but
Yeah.
I'm seeing Spider-Man behind you. And I just got to say, I love that you you have that there. Oh, all
Yes,
right.
I'm sorry. Oh yeah, I've got so
No,
much
that's
stuff.
great.
This is my sort of office space. I've got Doctor Who stuff all over the place. I've got some Marvel things all over the place. I've got a cinema room, a separate cinema room with a projector and things, and that's full of Marvel figurines and Doctor Who figurines and books and things. And it's where I go to watch my films on my 100-inch projector screen. It's one of the things I always wanted, and my house has got a garage which I never use. And I thought, well, let's turn it into a little bolt hole, a little man cave, and yeah, so it's full of a lot of my collectibles. But
Oh,
yeah,
that's amazing.
Spider Man remains my favorite superhero. I got to say.
Oh, so I was going to say, do you have take a lot of inspiration from Marvel?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I've certainly I read a lot of Marvel back in the 70s, I think, and then I sort of discovered some of the 60s stuff, and then I sort of fell away from it in the 80s. But of course, when the MCU started up again, it piqued my interest. So I've picked up lots of collections of the old comics. I'm not a fan of modern comics. I have to say I'm not a big fan of the art that you get in modern comics. It just doesn't seem to have the same impact as the classic, Jack Kirby, Steve
Right.
Ditko, John Buscema, all those. That's just to me, that's what comic art is. And I know we're off Doctor Who slightly, but I think that when
No,
comics
that's fine.
became graphic novels more aimed at adults, I think they lost a lot of their appeal for me. And I like going back and reading those quite innocent stories from the 60s and 70s. It's a nostalgia thing, and they're still very powerful. They're still energetic and imaginative.
I mean, you look at how and we talked about the stories in Doctor Who versus the effects, and
Mm.
certainly when you look at the storylines that have inspired the movies that we have today, and the huge successes, and clearly they are resonating with today's audience. And I know the movies don't always follow the plot lines of the comics perfectly, but we do see that those stories still hold a lot of power and
Oh yeah, yeah.
a big impact. And so as we look at the world of Doctor Who comics, which is where very uniquely this annual is born out of. What was your journey with discovering, reading Doctor Who comics? Was it from an early age or later in life?
It was an early age because I'm quite old. I remember reading some of the 60s comics, certainly the Patrick Troughton ones from sort of TV comic and things like that. But I really got into Doctor Who comics in the 70s with the classic John Pertwee ones from Countdown and TV Action. I mean, they to me are still the best Doctor Who comic strips because of the art was so fantastic. Jerry Haylock and these people, it's just incredible likenesses, and the stories, even though they didn't exactly reflect the style of the series, they're just hugely imaginative. And that there was like a 4 or 5 year block where those comic strips were absolutely fantastic. And I've read the Marvel comics that they've done since 79 when Doctor Who magazine or Doctor Who Weekly started out. And they're very clever, they're very good, but they don't have the same appeal. It is a nostalgia thing for me, going back looking at these things from when I was a kid. And I can, the John Pertwee ones, that's classic Doctor Who comics for me.
Right, good. And I wish so much that they would be able to reprint those
Oh
TV comic
yeah,
ones,
it'd be
because
lovely to have a properly bound, well, a bit like the annuals, a proper hardback
right.
bound volume of those comics would be fantastic. I mean, I've got some of the old classic comics that Marvel brought out, but it would be nice to have them in one big volume because
Yeah.
Jerry Anderson's son's Jamie, he's doing this now with the collected comics of UFO and Fireball XL5 and things, and you think that surely there is, if there's a market for that, there must be a market for the classic Doctor Who ones. But I suppose it's all tied up with rights of the original publishers and so on. But I'm hoping that one day it will happen.
Yeah, because if we've gotten to a point in the publications where they have caught up with the magazine comics,
Mm,
most of them, and are polishing them off,
yeah,
and are certainly keeping up with the new ones. And
yeah.
so with the success of releases like the Dalek Chronicles
Oh yeah,
being put out,
yeah.
I definitely think that they would be a much, like, I think there would be a certain level of introducing them to a
Mm.
new audience, but I think that they would be really well loved and received. I mean, we looked
Oh,
at the
I think so.
the Dalek mini series on
Yeah,
the official channels, and
mm.
how I knew of the that big round emperor-headed
Yeah,
Dalek from the
yeah,
from those comics, and I loved it, but I wasn't sure how it would be received because it's
yeah.
quite a departure from the
Well,
typical
yeah,
dome. I mean, it's the
that's right.
full dome, but it
Yeah,
was so well
yeah.
received, and
Oh
so
yeah,
I think that
yeah.
there is a market for that there.
Mm.
Um, and certainly, I love that the Eighth Doctor comics, they really felt that I think that they were the first ones that, well, certainly one of the ways in which I think they stood out was their ability to have these overarching plot lines,
Mm.
because there weren't any on TV during
Well, yeah,
that
yeah.
time.
They really had free reign to sort of reinvent the Cybermen and bring in new characters and go in all sorts of directions because there was no TV series restraining them. And
Right.
yeah, I think they were really lucky to have that period when they were able to do that.
Absolutely. And so that's especially a fascinating time. And I recommend people check out those,
Yeah.
Eighth Doctor graphic novels. There's four of them. And, I love that we could, in this annual, have a couple of pages where the original, comic strip was, shown,
Yeah,
and we got to
that's
see
right.
a behind the scenes, step by
Yeah,
step process.
yeah.
That was something that was really special about the annual.
Well, it was nice to bring those comic strips back into the public area again because people had forgotten them. And after the TV movie, that was where Doctor Who, when it became obvious there weren't going to be any more episodes, that was new Doctor Who. I know we had books and things as well, but that was a new Doctor Who medium, and I don't think it deserves to be forgotten. And I'm glad that they've reappeared in this book, and this book has cast new light on that era.
Absolutely, and as I think the only way in which I think that this annual could have been made better would have been if we'd been able to include all of those printed comics,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that people could see,
yeah,
where we were drawing from. But you know, different approaches, different authors, seeing how everybody has, tackled these different situations.
yeah.
We've if anything, as I look at this annual here, I don't know how you thought of this, but eh, one could see that that and say possibly, is this your TARDIS team on the sands of Horag?
But
It's
that did cross my mind. I thought, oh, could it be? Because he's got Sorg has got the cloak on. So yeah, I'm happy to claim it. Yeah, yeah,
it very much fits
yeah.
with your story,
Well, I
if
think
nothing
so. Yeah,
else.
I'll claim that. But one thing I'm pleased about doing a Paul McGann story is that it was this era because I think if I'd been asked to do something for the Big Finish era, I would be a bit all at sea because I haven't followed them. I don't really follow the Big Finish stuff, and I know there's been lots of arcs and characters. So if they'd asked me to do a story there, I would have been floundering a bit because I don't know the dynamic of how the Eighth Doctor has changed. I know of his companions and things, and I know vaguely because I've read about them, but I haven't heard them. So I was quite glad to still do the Doctor as he was on television and from the comic strips, which I was re-familiarized with. So I'm glad it was that era of Paul McGann rather than 10 years later down the line or something.
Yeah, I would love to see, certainly, an annual, maybe set, a couple years, or
Mm,
maybe in 2000 and something,
yeah,
when there would have been some of that Big
yeah.
Finish to celebrate that time.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I highly recommend the Eighth Doctor Adventures,
yeah,
with Lucy Miller.
yeah.
What a companion.
I did
And
hear
again,
I did hear the first couple. I think Storm Warning. I think that was one of the first ones. I did listen to
that
that one
was,
because
yeah,
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 and a couple of the others.
with
But I think there was so many Big Finish series and releases. It was just hard to keep up with them all, really, to be
Oh, it
honest.
is. Their
Yeah,
output is extraordinary. I mean,
yeah,
every month, 5 or 6 Doctor Who box sets. I don't know how anybody
yeah,
specifically keeps up with them. It's very impressive to me, and
oh,
and
yeah,
I love
yeah.
too. I mean, obviously you can pick and choose by your favorite doctors. Uh, who what was your entry point for Paul McGann? Was that, seeing the movie first, and
Yeah.
then into comics and
Yeah.
such?
It was seeing the movie because, as I said, I'm so old. I was around at the time, and I remember hearing that they were doing this TV movie and the anticipation for it. So watching that. I mean, they sold the video cassette as was at the time in
Yeah.
a local video shop, and I think it opened about midnight on the day of release, and I was in the queue buying it. Went home to watch it straight away, so I was sort of
Whoa.
there. This was before it was shown even on American televisions. I think it was on in America before we had it over here, and I
Yeah.
think it was certainly on video about 2 weeks before it was on television over here. So I couldn't wait to see it, and so that was sort of I saw him from the very beginning.
That's amazing. There was never, even though, made an American movie and it was shown here earlier, there was never a VHS release of the TV
No,
movie in the
no,
US.
no.
And we didn't, there's, in the UK, there's the normal DVD version, the original, and then the special edition. We didn't get the normal version either. We got the special edition when it came out.
Yeah.
And I don't think we got the Blu-ray version either.
Mm.
Which, I'm hoping one of these collection Blu-ray box sets will,
Well,
you know, I don't
I
know if
would
they
imagine
would do one just centered around the Eighth Doctor, but I'm hoping that we'll get some sort of new Blu-ray release at some
well,
point. I think a
I would think
steelbook would be amazing.
that would be. I would imagine they will do something that collects a lot of the stuff that came out in the wilderness
Right.
years, as they call them. There's a lot of material out there.
Yeah.
Probably not for an 8 disc set, but you could do a good 3 disc, 3 or 4 disc set with the film and various
Right.
mini episodes and things over the years, which would I'm sure that will happen at some point.
If they could, negotiate all the rights, there's certainly plenty of spin-off material that could
Yeah,
fill up some more
absolutely.
discs.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, have you, because we've kind of fallen into the world of Doctor Who Blu-rays, have you gotten? I think you have gotten your season 20
Oh yes.
Blu-ray.
Oh yes, yes. Yep.
Oh,
I had it.
and
I had
how
it.
are you
I
liking
had it
that?
2 days early. I had it 2 days early. I was very pleased. Yeah,
Because I remember I got the notification on YouTube, and of course you have your own YouTube channel.
I do. Yeah, it's a very small channel. It's building slowly, but it was something I just started doing during the pandemic when we were all stuck at home, and I started watching a lot of stuff on YouTube. And I thought, well, I'll just have a go at doing this just for fun. I'm not looking to have millions of subscribers and
Yeah,
monetize and things like that. It's just a bit of fun, a creative outlet when other creative outlets have been sealed off, and it's just fun to do.
I love it, and I think that I will definitely link your YouTube channel in the description down below,
Oh, thank you
and
very
I
much.
highly recommend that people subscribe. Yeah, and that's kind of it's been obviously a huge creative outlet, but I think that one of the things that I see in your videos is, and as I interview you now, you've got a very good presenting style, and I've just been impressed with people who
Yeah,
can continue, because and I've gotten better at it over the years, but when you first start out, there's a lot of editing and getting to a point where you can turn on the camera and eloquently and smoothly just
yeah,
talk about what you want to,
yeah.
and it helps with Doctor Who. We both know and
But
a lot, and can there's plenty to talk about. It's not something that's new to us,
yeah,
but
you
I love being able to see that, and I just wanted to say that you do a very good job with that.
Thank you very much. Well, that's one of the things I thought when I started doing it. And I know there's often lots of ums and ahs, but then everybody does that. But what I didn't
Right.
want to do, you see it on lots of YouTube videos, these every second there's edits where they cut out a little fraction of something and then another. And I just find that so jarring because it's obvious they've recorded something and then they've cut out, but it just jars and judders. And I just find that really painful to watch. So I just thought when I start mine, it's going to be warts and all. It's just me talking. And if I make a mistake, I'll just leave it in because it's like talking to a friend. You don't edit your talking to a friend. So you're just talking naturally. And if you stumble over your words, you got something wrong, well, that's life.
That's, I mean, and it absolutely works for you, and I think that
Yeah,
the editing can be an aspect that can slow you down in your
yeah,
production, or just you know lead to some level of burnout. But
yeah,
that style is very much an intentional, this jump cuts, and
yeah,
I
yeah,
use it a lot, but and it gets
yeah,
to the point where you're cutting out breaths, you're cutting out any mistakes, as you want to
yeah,
keep that attention, keep the
yeah,
audience engaged. But
yeah,
actually, a well-spoken, thought out video with a good story and a
mm,
purpose can be just as engaging, if not
I
more
think
so,
so.
than
Yeah,
a video
it's
with a bunch of
yeah.
jump cuts.
It's probably an age thing as well. As an older person, I just like to see something that flows and doesn't judder all the way through because I just find that irritating. But I know that people can, because it's a modern thing, isn't it? You know,
Right.
youngsters like that. Youngsters like that sort of speed and that sort of snappiness.
Yeah.
But I just like to sit back and watch something that flows naturally, like a conversation, and I have I've got some better editing software now, so I do cut a bit better.
Nice.
Maybe it was just too much of a faff. I couldn't be bothered. But now, if there's something that goes wrong, I think, oh, I'll get rid of that bit, and it's a bit more seamless. But I try not to let it obsess me. When I'll watch the video and think, well, I cut that bit, but I'm not thinking I'll cut that bit and I'll cut that for the sake of it. But then again, it's down to different tastes and different generational expectations and so on.
Right, absolutely. And that's something that I think is very special about Doctor Who, and
Mm,
why I appreciate um, seeing people who love the show as a whole. We all have our own favorite eras,
yeah,
but I love when
yeah,
people can appreciate the whole breadth of the show, because
mm,
you go back in time to styles, from today's, which is more fast paced, and you have these incredible effects, and made for a newer style audience, different storytelling, more
yeah,
emotion, more focus on the companions. But then you go all the way back to an also extraordinary time of so much, being so experimental, but also it being filmed practically live. And that's what,
yeah,
when
yeah.
you look at the production, I've got these wonderful complete history books behind me, and
Yes,
you
yeah,
you hear about, even into the 70s, the limited amount of time in which they had to record these episodes. Nowadays, the way movies are made, it's multiple shots for every line. You get to pick the one that the directors or the actors are most excited for.
yeah,
Back then, it was there. You had to do very minimal edits, and it had to
yeah,
be filmed very live. And so
yeah,
the older episodes, they're going to absolutely be less, in a way, less edited, because you had longer shots. It's going to feel at a slower pace, but
yeah.
you've got to respect the medium, and how things went out, and how it was basically live theater being
Yeah,
filmed.
yeah, yeah, very much so. I mean, there's a book which has just come out. I don't know if you, I would advise you to get a copy if you can. I think I've reviewed it on my channel, Pull to Open by Paul Hayes. And it's about it, it really looks at
Yeah.
the origins of Doctor Who and it's a lot of information we know, but he's pulled everything together about where, going way back to how the idea came together and how different people threw in different ideas. Absolutely fascinating book. And it's fascinating about the history of television. If, like me, you're interested in how television developed in the 60s, it's just it's like a real page turner. It's exciting because even though we know how the story ends and the Doctor Who ended up on screen, there are so many things that went wrong and so many people who didn't like the
Yes.
idea. It's fascinating, and as you say, the resources they had available, these tiny studios and tiny budgets, and as you say, doing it live, they could do two edits, and they couldn't go back to correct things. It's just I find stuff like that just fascinating. So if you can get hold of
Yeah.
that book, massively recommended to anybody who's interested in Doctor Who and television in general.
There you go. You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah,
I'm very excited about, to that recommendation. And of course,
yeah,
I did know of the book.
yeah.
Definitely add it to my ever growing list
Yes,
of.
yeah,
I don't think it's so much a checklist that I have as an ordered list of, I want to get everything, but just
yeah.
when do I want to get what. So
That's
just
right.
move that
Yeah,
up the list.
yeah,
And you're right. It's absolutely fascinating. And I think of the episode Turn Left, and how
mm,
one decision can change
yeah.
the course
Absolutely.
of history. And I think one moment that is, I mean, if there was ever a year to watch the beautiful movie An Adventure in Space and Time, or
Mhm.
the that drama,
Yeah,
docudrama, I guess, it would be this year. And it's
oh,
a
yeah, yeah,
beautiful production. And
yeah,
what it highlights is that, I think, that turn left moment is when they Sydney Newman didn't want the Dalek script to happen, because it was
yeah.
bug-eyed aliens, and that's not what he wanted.
That's right.
And it was the only one finished, and so they
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
they pushed back and said, there's no
yeah,
other script ready, and we need to
yeah,
be filming at this time.
yeah,
And that decision, the way that it was designed, but I think that was a
yeah,
moment which, obviously, the Dalek mania, was
Mm.
is the reason that Doctor Who has
Yeah.
survived. And
Yeah.
so, when you look at that specific aspect of Doctor Who survival, the Daleks, Dalek mania, is it something that you think you that when you look at, say, this upcoming new series with Doctor Who, these specials will be what they are, but when you look at then this new era, this new Doctor, what are you more excited about? Are you hoping for returning villains like the Daleks, Cybermen, Ice Warriors, or are you hoping for to see new characters and monsters like what you created in your short story? Are you hoping to see a mix of them? Because I know I always love seeing the Daleks return. Every time, sometimes people are like, "Oh, they're overused" or whatever, and I'm saying each new author has an attempt to create a brand new great story with the Dalek. So I'm
Yeah.
always welcoming the return of
Yeah.
older villains. But yeah, so what are your hopes?
Well, I think the Daleks, yes, they're a must, aren't they? Because they are
Yes.
the Doctor Who creature, and whenever you see them, your mind automatically makes that connection to 1963. You can't help it because you
Yeah.
think it's because of that creature that we're watching this series now. Because as you say, if that story hadn't been made, Doctor Who probably wouldn't have lasted more than, well, as the book tells you, it was almost cancelled even before it got onto the air. And
Yeah.
then it was almost
Yeah.
cancelled after 4 episodes. So the Daleks are massively important. And I think they have to come back. Not all the time, because I think less can be more. You look forward to them if you don't see them a couple of years. And there is the fear that you just get the same sort of story regurgitated, but I don't think that's necessarily happened that much. I think I I do like the Cybermen, but I don't think they've been that well served in the new series, really. I think they've just become more robots. I think they've lost the sort of the humanity of the things inside the costumes. You don't get the sense of these are living creatures. They come across like cannon fodder to be blown up, and I'd rather they do something a bit different with them. But I think I'd like to see new things. I do like to see it go again. It's space and time. You're all of space anywhere. So why would you keep seeing the same creatures and the same people?
Mhm.
I can understand the Doctor's attraction to Earth, so you get Earth a lot and various Earth characters. But I think if you're out in space, I'd like to see a lot of new things, and I would like to see. I'd like to see them make a concerted effort to create a new iconic monster because I know we had the
Right.
Weeping Angels, and I think the Weeping Angels have limited potential, to be honest. I think they were a great idea, but I don't know what else you do with the Weeping Angels. But I would like to see something else because I loved Doctor Who in the 70s with John Pertwee when you had the Axons and the Sea Devils and the mutants and these alien races. And I like that sort of thing. So I think, I'd like to see a couple more of those sorts of creatures that could return now and again, regular returning foes, but just some new ideas because it's such a big universe for Doctor Who,
Yeah.
and there's infinite capacity for new monsters and aliens and villains and things, rather than relying on the tried and tested ones.
Absolutely. I absolutely am looking forward to both, and I think I'll be
Mm.
happy with either.
Yeah,
As we look at the you talking about the John Pertwee era and creating the new monsters. I agree that the Weeping Angels incredibly iconic, definitely
yeah,
added into the halls of fame of
yeah.
Doctor Who
Oh
monsters,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I think something like that. We talk about the difference between a rubber suit monster and something that the Daleks were very special in that they essentially completely disguised the
oh yes,
the
yeah,
humanoid form within them.
yeah,
And so I
yeah,
think the Weeping Angels in a way also did that. Not that
yeah,
you couldn't tell that there was somebody inside of a Weeping
yeah,
Angel costume, but that it could be
yeah,
applied to any statue. And
oh yeah,
because they very rarely were seen moving,
yeah,
that also took away the idea that, oh, this could be. And so now any statue, anything.
yeah,
And I think that as we look at the John Pertwee era, because I think I love that era, and I think for me, if you watch a couple of John Pertwee stories, with certain doctors, you're like, oh, these are the best episodes, and this is what this Doctor is. But I think that the Third Doctor's era is one of the most, if not the most consistent. And so for me, it's
Absolutely.
like if you
Yeah.
watch one John Pertwee story and you enjoy it, then
Mhm.
you're gonna love
Yeah.
almost all of the rest. I am
Absolutely.
consistently impressed and shocked by,
Yeah.
for it's 5 seasons. There's a lot,
Yeah.
and it's there are the unit seasons, there are the seasons where you can travel through time and space, but I'm
Yeah.
really impressed by how consistent that era is.
Yeah. Well,
And
it's the tone that's consistent, is what I like about it.
yeah,
If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would probably have said, "Oh, Tom Baker's my favorite classic Doctor." But a couple of years ago, I revisited a lot of John Pertwee stuff because a friend of mine who was new to Doctor Who, he was discovering old Doctor Who. So I was watching a lot of John Pertwee episodes again. And as you say, it's as good. I know his last season is not, maybe it's starting to get a little bit shoddier. But his performance was always this sort of beacon all the way through his 5 years. But I think with Tom Baker, once he started to get too much control over the character, I mean, you know what his last few seasons were like, and it started to get a bit comedic and pantomimish and knockabout. But John Pertwee had the same powerful, compelling performance all the way through. There was never any dip, which is why I now say that John Pertwee is my favorite classic Doctor because of the era rather than. I mean, Tom Baker was brilliant, fantastic for the first 3, 4 years, but I think there was a dip then when he stayed too long and he started having too much control over the way he developed the character because nobody would challenge him and stop him being silly, and he just became too silly. So John Pertwee is my go-to for the exactly reason that you say. There's this consistency across the 5 years.
right, right, and certainly, the first seasons, that it can really go into two kind of three parts. You've got the season with Liz Shaw, then you've got
Yeah,
that transition to Joe Grant. I think and they handle that wonderfully, and we
yeah,
I think that one of the things that really helps is that extended family cast of
oh yeah,
characters,
yeah,
and you
definitely.
can throw them into any situation, but you
Yeah,
can know that you can return to that. And so the first 12th Doctor, I mean 12th season of Doctor Who, this first fourth Doctor season, it absolutely hit the ground running with Tom Baker nailing
mm,
that performance of
yeah,
the Doctor, and
yeah,
Sarah Jane and Harry. But it was the last season kind of with stories commissioned by and overseen by the John Pertwee guard
yeah,
before Philip
yeah.
Hinchcliffe came
That's
in.
right.
and
Yeah,
and then you see season 13 and 14, and that very hammer horror gothic
yeah,
era
yeah,
that I think really succeeded because of using that shorthand of you know um, using other stories that we know in our mythos,
yeah,
and using that because
yeah,
there is that sort of classic struggle of the Doctor shows up to a place, and you've got to introduce us all to a new planet, a new society, a new people, a new problem, make us care about them. And
yeah,
that can be very hard or laborious to do in a
yeah,
short amount of time, even in a 45-minute
yeah,
episode.
yeah,
It's not a four-parter length. And so I think that it does take it, having that shorthand of, oh, okay, so this is like, this story, this is they're going into this world of this myth, and all of a
yeah.
sudden I understand, and so
Well, yeah,
I do think
it's a
that there
sort of
were.
shorthand, isn't it? It's sort of
Right,
almost saying to you, this is Doctor Who's Frankenstein, this is Doctor Who's Forbidden Planet, or
right,
it's that sort of shorthand, so the audience it knows the story in a way before it starts watching it. It has got that reference point.
right, right. And with the third Doctor's era, even though you had a sort of different style from that, you had that, you know the shorthand was, we know who Unit is, we know who the
Yeah,
Unit family is, we
yeah,
know he's stuck on Earth,
yeah,
and then you can explore it from there. And they were very, very creative back then,
yeah, yeah,
with the stories, even though they were, again, that limitation breeds the
mm,
creativity. So,
yeah.
when you think of the going back to the Eighth Doctor, Stacy and Sard, um, where was your was there a particular, um when you were writing the story, was there you know a time where you found like what was the biggest sort of struggle with writing for these characters? Was it the lack of you know familiarity with them, or was it a point like I found with my short story? Okay, I've set up this problem. How on earth am I going to solve it? I didn't have that
Yeah.
end solving in
No.
mind.
Yeah.
But then, it came to me, and after some pacing around. So for you, was there a point like that where you'd say, oh, I overcame this?
I think one of the things I was concerned about is I think I had a handle on Paul McGann's Doctor from the TV
Yes.
movie. So I thought I can cope with that. But I was very conscious of the fact that two companions, one's an alien, one's a young woman, and I wanted to try and avoid that stereotype of the female companion screaming and what's happening, Doctor. I don't think I did particularly. I think there's a lot because it's very hard to find things for them to do, especially in a short story when you've got three main
Right.
characters. So all I could do really is try and write them as believable characters with believable dialogue. But I don't know if I gave them enough agency in the story because ultimately it's about the Doctor, and the Doctor is the one who makes contact with the intelligence. And unfortunately, these companions are sort of standing round, and I think that made me realize how hard it must have been, and must be, to give the companions something to do because they are the third wheel, really, if you like. They're the spare part in a way because it's the Doctor we're watching, and which is why I admire the writers who are able to give the companions more to do because it is difficult. It is difficult to give them
Yeah.
something important to do to the story. Because
Right.
when I did my first one, which was a John Pertwee story, I specifically wrote that with the same thing in mind because it was Joe Grant who comes up with the solution to the situation. She realizes that how to turn it on its head, and I was quite pleased with that. And that was a conscious thing because I wanted to give her a bit more to do than just stand around going, "What's this? What's that? Help!" And
Yeah.
it is hard to give those characters a bit more than just names on a page.
Right, right. Well, I think you did a great job with it, and
Thank you.
you're right that the situation, from their creation, their purpose is to, you know, aid the audience in understanding,
Yeah,
what the Doctor is doing, give them someone to talk to and explain things
yeah,
to, and I do think that is a challenge, but I think that it is one that you rose to the occasion to. And as we talk about, I think the setting can reveal certain aspects, and I think that your particular setting was a bit harder in that we've seen stories in the annual where it's set on spaceships, and
yeah,
Stacy would know how to operate in that environment.
yeah, yeah,
Certainly, this environment was the heat was more conducive
yeah,
to Sard, and he
yeah,
enjoyed that. I love that moment
yeah,
where
yeah,
he's very
yeah,
much at home with that aspect of
yeah,
it.
yeah.
And but I think that sometimes the story is about the companions being out of their depth, and
Mm,
maybe that's the point. Maybe they're just
yeah,
feeling that and
yeah,
feeling like they need to be there to help the Doctor, and so
yeah.
it's an interesting
And,
dichotomy there.
and I think there's also probably a difference in writing for a character on the screen than on in a
Mm.
story, because on the screen your companions are there to ask the Doctor questions to explain to the audience, but in a story, that necessity isn't really there because you can explain
Right.
things in the text. So it's
Right.
a slightly different sort of purpose for those characters, I think, really.
Yeah, you have an inner dialogue, and
Yeah,
it as the reader is viewing the situation, I think that you also have more agency to, okay, well, you're focusing on the Doctor right now, so there's no one to upstage him, whereas in the
yeah,
shot, if they're just
yeah,
standing around with nothing to do,
yeah.
it can absolutely upstage. And so yeah, it is very
But
interesting to me how.
and I always think of things like the early Peter Davison stories when he had three companions, and there are specific scenes where he's talking to Tegan, and Nissa and Adric are standing in the background like props without saying or doing anything or reacting. And And I noticed that at the time, and when I see it now, I sort of wince and think they're just standing there. They're not even pretending to talk to each other. They're just literally furniture. And that's the risk of having too many supporting characters. And I think it's a problem that we had with the first Jodie Whittaker season, the first and second, really, the 45-minute episodes, four main characters. You've got to service four main characters. And you can't do it. They could do it in the 60s because you had long stories. So you could go off and do little things. But I think it's very hard to get that balance, to get good characterization in shorter episodes or short story.
We saw that with the the 80s and the Fifth Doctor. I mean, the as well as with any time you've had more than two two or more companions, and I think the 60s handled it surprisingly well,
Mm,
with multiple companions. That was always kind of the prerogative and very much an archetypal
yeah,
amount of companions. But I think it came to a head when it's Kinda, when they're like, "Oh, Nissa, you're gonna be in the you're
yeah,
gonna be in the TARDIS this whole
yeah,
episode,"
yeah,
and we're gonna deal with that. I do think that uh, while that multiple companions, three or more companions, can be done well, but as you say, there needs to be certain things that need to happen with the writing and the setting for that to happen. I do think though that I like to see more than I have enjoyed immensely the one companion, one doctor dynamic. But
mm,
I do think that you can have two companions, and we
mm,
saw that with Bill and Nardole, because when you just have the one companion and the doctor, oftentimes they get split up. And
yeah,
when the doctor no longer has a companion, you find some other character from the episode rises into that role.
yeah. That's
So
true. Yeah,
essentially, we have two
yeah,
companions. Now,
yeah,
that model with just one companion, though, means that you can have a different sort of companion and character taking on that
yeah,
companion role in a different setting. So maybe if you want to
yeah,
highlight that, you could say
yeah,
that's a good thing. But I do
yeah,
notice that the Doctor always seems to have two companions an episode,
mm,
even if
yeah.
it is just one that's
There
come out
is,
the TARDIS with
yeah.
him.
It's like a surrogate companion that they've sort of met when they're wandering about. And for me, I think one of the great, the sort of classic Doctor companion thing was in Patrick Troughton's time when you had Jamie and Victoria and Jamie and Zoe. That was almost
Yes.
like an archetype of how it worked because you'd often get one of them getting into trouble. One would be with the Doctor explaining what's going on. The other would be in trouble. They had to find the other one and rescue them. And I think that opened up the story up a bit more. So I think two companions can work well.
Yeah, and I do think that one thing that was a struggle with certain characters like Nissa or Romana as companions, or anybody who um, was more likely to know what was going on
Yeah,
and what the Doctor was doing, is that then
yeah,
their role as a companion to ask all the questions
yeah,
doesn't quite work out, because why would they?
yeah,
Because they know,
yeah,
Romana knows what the Doctor's doing and is probably
yeah,
better at doing it at
yeah,
most of the time. And so
yeah,
with Jamie, I think it was a lovely thing, because even though he is an intelligent character, he does have his intelligence. I think part of it was sort of this where he came from in history, and compared to the Doctor, and I think there was an aspect to his character of maybe being not quite the brightest bulb of
yeah,
everybody who is in the TARDIS at the
yeah,
time, and certainly
yeah,
compared to the Doctor. I mean, most
yeah,
humans are not the brightest
yeah,
bulb of the block, but I think
yeah,
that worked especially well for him and his character. It
yeah,
made the asking of questions seem more second nature and more appropriate,
yeah,
rather than it feeling like a narrative device.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
if you have, I think, a companion who's too intelligent, it's like, well, then why are you asking the
Well, yeah,
question? Because you
I think
know.
I think part of the risk with having a historical companion is that they're always going to be asking questions about mundane things.
Yeah,
What's
yeah.
that, what's that switch? What's that thing? Everything is going to be completely alien to them. So not
What's
only are they on a
electricity?
yeah, what's electricity? What's glass? What's this? What everything is going to be a question. So it's sort of trying to ignore that and just focus on the story itself and the questions they have from the story. I think it was a similar thing
Absolutely.
with Leela. You had a similar dynamic with her, that sort of doctor. And I like
Yeah,
that thing that you have occasionally. You had it with the Doctor and Ace, you had it with the Doctor and Leela, where they're trying to educate them and sort of be like a mentor and a teacher. I think that's quite a nice
yeah.
aspect and a nice way to have a doctor companion relationship that it's the Professor Higgins thing from My Fair Lady. He's trying to educate somebody who doesn't know about these things, but without having
And
it being.
then they can have these wonderful moments of teaching him things, and at
Yeah,
least, I mean, with Ace, as you say, I mean, literally calling him professor,
yeah,
it
yeah,
sets up this role of teacher and
mm,
learner, and
yeah,
the Doctor and Bill was like that, as
yeah,
well,
yeah,
and so I do love how we can have this sort of character development as well of
mm,
in the modern series, but then as well with Big Finish, or even books nowadays, going back and giving that character development to classic companions and that time
mm,
to shine emotionally on the
yeah,
screen.
yeah,
It is just so cool to see characters like Stacy and Sard, who's had such a small moment in the limelight compared
mm,
to the on TV companions,
yeah,
and to have them celebrated in this way.
yeah.
This has
But
been,
it's nice. It's nice that they're not just characters that people think, oh, they were in a couple of comic strips. They've got a bit of life beyond that. So I
yeah,
think that's,
absolutely.
I think
I
that's,
I would love to see, like, I know the artist who did the illustrations for my story, Chris, was saying that there's not even a lot of fan art of them out
no,
there, and
no,
and so this book is chock full of that, and I hope that
yeah,
it
yeah,
will. I know that it is having that impact of bringing them into the forefront, and I would just love one day to be at a convention and see an Ace Doctor walking around with a Stacy and an Ice Warrior
yeah.
lumbering behind him.
I
Like,
think
that
that
would be
will.
amazing.
I think that's probably going to happen at some point. I'm surprised it hasn't already, to be honest.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe it hasn't. We
yeah,
weren't on the lookout for it,
yeah,
but
yeah.
Ice Warriors are not a costume I see a lot at conventions. Have you ever
No,
seen an
no,
Ice Warrior at
I
a
don't think
convention?
I have. It doesn't look like a very comfortable costume. I think it's.
No.
I think the classic, the original Ice Warrior costume is fantastic. I think it really looks effective.
Mm.
But I wouldn't want to be stuck in one of them for 6 hours wandering around. Thank you
Oh,
very much. No,
no,
no.
no. And
Uh,
it does have a certain danger, like with the Cybermen or the Daleks, of the actor being forgotten inside
yeah,
during a lunch
that's
break.
right. Yeah, yeah. Or passing out and nobody realizing because they can't see them. Yeah,
Yeah, or having to rest by leaning up
yeah,
against a
that's
slightly
right.
angled board.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh my goodness.
yeah,
Well, I want to say, again, to anybody who has not yet gotten the annual, to absolutely go and get it. We have these beautiful three different covers for it.
yeah,
And it's just an absolute joy and a thrill. And I know I'm biased because my short story's in there as well, but having
yeah,
read the rest of the
yeah,
content, and seeing the names and getting to
yeah.
meet these incredible writers and artists, I cannot recommend it enough. And so I
Yeah.
want to say thank you for your time here today.
No, it's
Is
been
there
an absolute pleasure.
anywhere is there anywhere where we can find you on social media? Obviously, I said you have a YouTube channel. We'll link that in the
Yeah.
description down below. Are you
I
on Twitter, or the
um
formerly known as Twitter X?
X or whatever it is. I am, but I very rarely use it. And if I do, I end up getting into an argument with somebody. So I try not to use it. I do
Smart.
have I do have my own personal Facebook. There is also a Facebook page for my YouTube channel, but
Nice.
I'm not very good at keeping on top of these things. So there is a World of Stuff Facebook page
Well,
which people are welcome to have a look at, and perhaps I'll start getting things moving on it. But mainly it's just a YouTube channel, to be honest. I don't really understand Instagram, but it's mainly Facebook and YouTube. So
yeah,
that's where
awesome. So
people find
those
me.
will be linked in the description down below. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been
Thank
wonderful
you, Alex.
having you.
It's been lovely to have a chat with you. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Bye.
Thank you.